Good afternoon and welcome to the third of three presentations in the ALCTS Annual 2012 Online Pre-Conference, Local Collections Collective Context, Managing Print Collections in the Age of Collaboration. I'm Jessica Phillips, host of today's pre-conference. Today's presentation is Shared Collection Management, Planning and Communication with Sam Demas and Robert Kieft. Sam Demas is currently freelance library consultant. Prior to that, Sam worked as a library director, as a specialist in collections and preservation in the research library community, and as a collaborator and an instigator of numerous projects and programs. As college librarian and senior lecturer at Carleton College for 13 years, Sam and his colleagues experimented with the development of the Liberal Arts College Library as both a virtual space and a vibrant place of student research, community building, and cultural events. Sam provided leadership in establishing the Bridge Consortium with St. Olaf College and was involved with programs and initiatives of the Oberlin Group of Libraries. Prior to Carleton, Sam worked at Cornell University for 20 years in a variety of positions and libraries. He was head of collection development and preservation at the A.R. Mann Library of Cornell University from 1985 to 1998. And Associate Director of Mann Library for 3 years before that. His research interests at Cornell were in selection for preservation, national preservation planning, and in adapting the principles and practices of collection development to the challenge of developing the electronic library. As an administrator in a dynamic electronic library environment, he specialized in management strategies for developing staff skills, adapting policies and re-engineering procedures to mainstream the selection and delivery of electronic information. As a collection administrator, he has developed models for systematic selection of electronic resources and worked Dialogue to develop the first contract for an aggregation of databases. As a preservation administrator, he helped to develop a national preservation plan for agricultural science literature. He was also active in promoting the use of a disciplinary approach to setting priorities for preservation and for constructing an intellectual framework for cooperative preservation efforts. Bob Kieft is the college librarian at Occidental College in California. Prior to moving to Occidental in the fall of 2008, Bob worked at Haverford College in Pennsylvania, where he was most recently Director of College Information Resources and librarian of the college. From 1974 through 1988, he worked at the Stanford University Libraries in public services and collection development. He is currently on the executive committee of a discussion group within the Modern Language Association, Libraries and Research in Languages and Literatures, and on the executive board of the Western Regional Storage Trust. He was general editor of ALA's Guide to Reference from 2000 through 2009 and has published articles and reviews in Choice, ARBA, College and Research Libraries, Reference Services Quarterly, and Reference Services Review. While in Pennsylvania, he pursued interests in cooperative collections work in the Tri-College Consortium. As a board member of the Philadelphia Area Consortium of Special Collections Libraries, and as a board member and convener of a task force on cooperative collection initiatives in the Pennsylvania Academic Library Consortium. Robert helped to plan and conduct an IMLS-funded grant to lyricists and partners in the fall of 2010 titled Toward a Cloud Collection, Designing a National Framework to Manage Monographs, and is founder with Bernie Riley, president of the Center for Research Libraries, of a group who meet informally at ALA to discuss cooperative collections issues. He holds a PhD from Stanford University and an MLIS from the University of California, Berkeley. If you have questions for either of the presenters, please type them into the question box on your screen. Also, please note today's session will be recorded and you will receive an email with a link to the recording shortly after the conclusion of the webinar. A copy of the slides will also be provided. You are invited to use the Twitter hashtag SharedPrintMGT, which you see on the slide, to interact with other participants during the webinar. However, please continue to submit questions for the presenters using the question box on the screen, as neither the presenters nor the host will monitor Twitter during the presentation. Please note that there may be a slight delay as I turn the presentation over to Sam.
Thank you. Get my screen up. I'm coming to you from Claremont, California, and I want to talk today with you about the idea of formal collection management plans as a way of articulating both the local institutions' strategy and guidelines for managing their collections, and also as a way of a consortium expressing its approach to collective collections management. And so from a local perspective, shared print archiving looks like an insurance policy where last copies will be preserved for the consortium. And it provides a trusted backdrop against which you can manage your collection locally. One of the most important outcomes of this is a sense of confidence and trust on the part of the institution that the collection is being managed in a way that will ensure enduring access to materials that may no longer be available locally. And then from a consortial perspective, it is in a sense a set of understandings that make good on that promise, and a shared service layer to provide the discovery and access over time. And of course a model for cooperative funding. I neglected to say that I'll take questions about halfway through my presentation, and then go on to a second part. I'm going to focus first on shared collection management, and then second on local collection management. So a collection management plan, the way I see it, is simply a written statement of what your philosophy and strategy and policies and guidelines are. And it's really quite remarkable to me how few institutions have stepped back and taken the time to actually put down in writing what it is where it is that they're going with their collections, and in particular articulating why it's going to be better for their campus when they have managed their collections in the ways that they've described. And how to manage, they also will articulate how this local collection management is situated in a broader regional and national effort. And from a shared consortial perspective, it is the articulation of a shared vision and model, a formal governance structure, and a set of understandings for managing the collections. And it also, the plan, defines the rights, roles, and responsibilities of the participants. And one of the first steps is to determine what level of, what type of archiving one will undertake. And the three basic models are distributed archiving, or archiving in place, and the ASERL, the Associated Research Libraries of the Southeast, is a good example of that. A centralized storage model of which RECAP and MLAC and the CIC are good examples, and hybrid models which employ both centralized storage and distributed archiving, of which WEST is a prime example. And one of the first steps that all of you will undertake, if you haven't already, in establishing a shared print archive is developing a formal Memorandum of Understanding. And I've included here links to two resources that are very helpful in that. The Center for Research Libraries Print Archives registration, preservation registration, has links to about 30 programs where you can get information on how they have undertaken to organize themselves examples of their memoranda of understanding, and in some cases actual holdings for, I think, 8 institutions where the materials, the specific titles that they have archived are searchable in a database. And then there's a extremely helpful report that was published in 2009 by OCLC, RLG, Shared Print Policy Review, which analyzed a number of shared print agreements and identified the critical elements to include in devising a shared print archiving agreement for a group of libraries. Typically, that memorandum of understanding would include the topics that are depicted here, and I'm going to talk very briefly about each one and then entertain your questions on them. So simply determining in the end who's going to participate in this and what the qualifications for participation are. What will be the governing body, and oftentimes having a pre-existing consortium makes it much easier for a group to basically extend their pattern of relationship and cooperation to include shared print archiving. But it certainly is quite possible and has been done successfully to start out de novo with a new consortial relationship which has as its primary or a primary function shared print. And the question always comes up as to whether this should be a legal entity and whether there should be a legally binding agreement, and that will depend a lot on local politics and considerations, but generally speaking, it seems to be a very good idea to make this an enduring and legally binding kind of agreement, given that there's going to be significant reliance each on the other for a long period of time. One of the key considerations in this is who will own the shared materials, whether they'll be collective or individual ownership, and who will make decisions about this shared collection. How will they be made? As far as I know, the only group so far who has taken the bold step of actually saying that the collection will be collectively owned is the 5 colleges in the Amherst, Massachusetts area. And even there, one of them is a state university, the University of Massachusetts, and its collections are not, in fact, jointly owned. They are separately owned from those of the other 4 participants. And specifying just exactly how collection management decisions will be made, that is how the policies will be and guidelines will be adapted over time, is an important detail because we're really talking about how decisions will be made about materials that were once individually owned and are now shared, even if they're not collectively owned. And then a key consideration is the retention period. And there, most places seem to be going towards a 25-year period, which is long enough to get it out of a person's professional career. They won't have to decide again, but it's not in perpetuity, which seems like a big step to be making. But in the end, I think everyone feels that these 25-year retention agreements will very likely be renewed, and that consideration, that decision will be a no-brainer looking back 25 years from now. And a particularly dicey provision is that of opting out. If for any reason an institution decides it wants to withdraw from the collective collection, either a particular volume or a set of materials or all of their holdings, there needs to be careful deliberation about the circumstances and terms under which that might be entertained, because in the meantime, many decisions have been made locally based on assurances that that material will be available. Another major component of a collection management plan, a shared collection management plan, is what exactly will the collection comprise? And there are many different approaches to this. Many of our shared print collections are more or less default collections. They developed as shared storage facilities over a period of time. Quite often there was no particular vision beyond storing lesser used materials at a cost-effective rate that guided the particular selection of materials. And the UC storage facilities certainly started that way. Pascal and MLAC and Florida's statewide shared collection and recap are examples of that. And some of these now are being situated in a broader, more intentional kind of collection, shared collection. Publisher-based collections are also evident in, for example, the CIC's shared print repository, where the emphasis is on sci-tech publishers and assembling as complete as possible holdings of the journals of particular publishing entities, and the Center for Research Libraries and others who have put together JSTOR archives. A discipline-based approach is, I think, particularly interesting, and the fields of agriculture and law are moving ahead to extend work that they've done over a period of years, working in partnership with the Center for Research Libraries with an IMLS grant. A genre-based model would be the Federal Depository shared archive that ACERL is putting together, a group of 40 libraries. And then the Hathi Trust is proposing to develop a print archive that corresponds to the digital archive of monographs that they have, some 10 million volumes. And then finally, there are beginning to emerge more intentional collections. A set of decisions to assemble collections libraries is perhaps the premier. The focus there is currently on journals. The main shared collections project is finding its way towards an intentionally assembled shared print archive, and there are many other examples. The Michigan Consortium of Library Services is also working in that direction. Yesterday's webinar talked about cataloging, and that is there are certain requirements that would want to be included in a Memorandum of Understanding about bibliographic records. Collection management, as I said, who's authorized to do what on the basis of what guidelines in managing the collection going forward, and provisions for digitization and weeding and deduplication are examples of that, as are what are the specific environmental conditions and security measures that will be required either in a central facility or in a distributed arrangement where the books are actually held in trust in a given library. And then finally, the access and service layer. whereby provisions are made for use of the shared materials, either on-site or loaned. Consortium needs to face is whether and to what extent priority will be given to members, participants in the consortium for access over just anybody who wants to use the material via interlibrary loan. And increasingly there are provisions made for digitization on demand. And then finally, figuring out how to fund this cooperation. And some of the considerations there are whether there will be a group subsidy of the considerable overhead involved in actually changing records and preparing materials to become part of a shared collection, or whether that expense is borne by each school individually. And in some cases, there's a subsidy available for all of the schools participating. And in other cases, such as ASERL, each school really bears its own costs. So those are the considerations in a shared collection management plan, large parts of which are formalized in a written agreement. So at this point, I'd like to take any questions that people have on those topics. And I am not seeing any. Since there are no questions, I think what I'll do is move on to part 2, which is to do with local collection management plans. Wait, sorry, there is a question. Why is it necessary to include a collection policy in the MOU rather than a separate one that is referred to? Well, it certainly isn't essential to include a full-blown collection policy in an MOU. However, in the statement of purpose, I think it's a wise thing to give a general sense of the nature of the collection. And you can use appropriate weasel words to allow for broadening of the scope in future, and you certainly can refer to a separate, more detailed policy. If there are no IS, can you expand on cost sharing facility costs, etc.? Well, to be honest with you, this is not an area where I have a lot of expertise. The models that I'm familiar with are largely shared by one institution. So for example, the Minnesota Library Access Center is a state-funded institution, and the only costs borne by the participants are those that are entailed in preparing the materials to be shipped, actually changing the records, and loading the truck. Beyond that, it's borne centrally. So I'm afraid you've actually asked on about the topic that I am least informed about. I'm sorry to say. Seeing no other questions, let's turn now to the level of the local collection management, where basically you're writing up a plan that describes the overarching framework for practical decision making. Basically, to what end are you managing this collection? Now, as I said before, most libraries actually don't have a coherent written plan that describes what the library collection will look like 5 or 10 years down the road when a series of discrete collection management projects have been implemented. It doesn't mean that they don't necessarily have a vision as to where it's going, but they may appear to be flying by the seat of their pants in some regards. And Bob is going to talk to us about what happens on a campus when the appearance is of a collection that's being managed without an overall plan. So the first thing that one wants to articulate is exactly what are the goals, the values, and the commitments that you have for this collection, and what strengths do you have in the collection, and how will you manage the collection in those areas of strength? To what extent is your intent to identify unique materials, for example? So this first section on goals, values, and commitments should really tie the library and should tie the program to the library and the institutional mission. It should really try to situate the collection in the broader context of the college or university, the consortium, and the regional and national shared print environment. And it should articulate what role collaboration will play in relation to your local collection management efforts. It should articulate a rationale for participating in a shared effort. Is it to broaden the scope of collection access? Is it to allow you to weed with assurance that materials will still be available? Is it to create space for other uses? Is it all of the above? And in the end, as I mentioned earlier, it really should articulate how the collection management plan will, in the end, benefit users. And I've listed here some of the topics that should be addressed in an overall statement of the goals of your collection management effort. The plan should also discuss the topic of Tuesday's webinar and of Monday's webinar, which is what is your plan for bibliographic records, and have you done a reclamation project to clean up the data and to provide consistent matching points so that your collection analysis work will be effective. And I won't dwell on these because they were thoroughly covered in the prior two webinars. Then outlining what your intentions are and what your guidelines and criteria will be for retaining materials in the stacks, the open stacks, for moving materials to storage, for transferring materials to special collections, and or for digitization. And most libraries have, in various states of completeness, sets of criteria and guidelines for all of these things. What I think one needs to do is to look at them carefully to ensure that they take into account disciplinary differences. among for the use of the scholarly resources. There is sometimes a tendency to apply one set of criteria for, say, transfer of materials to storage for all disciplines. And it can often result in materials that go into storage that scholars would prefer to have in the open stacks. Similarly, a statement of what your goals are, what your guidelines and criteria are for weeding, whether you're going to weed across the collection as a whole, or whether you're going to do targeted weeding based on some collection analysis work that has been done. It's also a good idea to look at the staff capacity that you have and to take an approach that's calibrated to ensure that you've actually got enough staff to not only conduct the weeding but to also conduct the process of a faculty vetting of the weeding results if that's part of your program, and then to look at whether you're going to do ongoing weeding or a one-time project. Oftentimes libraries leave weeding till they've just run out of space, and then they attack it as one big project. And it takes a huge amount of staff time to actually conduct the weeding process, to do the records changes. It takes a lot of faculty time if they're engaged in reviewing the results, and it's not, in fact, I think, the ideal way to go. Better to weed progressively over time. Similarly, well, not similarly, but it's really important, I think, to have a policy about disposition of materials which are being discarded, withdrawn. It's a politically charged area, and I'm sure that Bob will be talking about this. What the people, the faculty, staff, and students for whom we are stewards of the collection wish us to do is to try to at least make a strong effort to find a good home for every book that we no longer need. And that, of course, is a huge undertaking. And so your policy should state what it is you're willing to do, and that policy should be actually approved by some version of your local academic governance as a way of ensuring that you don't end up in a situation where you're being accused of ravaging the collection and in some sort of a renegade action and provoking a double-fold redux. So those are the elements of a local collection management plan. The final one is actually the one that Bob is going to talk about, which is education, outreach, communication, and politics. Before we turn it over to Bob, I would like to take any questions that you might have. And the first question is, looks as if he has the topics of the two previous webinars assigned to the wrong days. If you want to correct that slide. Oh, okay, I beg your pardon. So, I should have asked this in advance as a poll, but I wonder how many of your libraries which are contemplating going into a shared print archive have a local collection policy statement, collection management statement that would guide you in your participation in a larger shared effort. And if you do, perhaps you could tell us a little bit about it. In any case, are there questions? about anything that I've mentioned with regard to the elements of a local collection management plan. Well, seeing no questions, I would like to now turn it over to Bob. There'll be a slight delay as the technology moves the screen over.
Okay, are we there? Jessica, is everybody seeing my my title slide?
Yes, they are.
Okay, thank you. Well, thank you for letting me join you today. Sam has done an excellent job of setting me up, and I would be glad to take any questions you might have as we go along. Jessica will monitor the question box, and I would be glad to take your questions as they occur to you. A couple words about my title. In terms of this whole business of communication, Sam has suggested that all of this, these arrangements that we're making with respect to our collections need to be public and above board. And I emphasize that by inviting you not to whisper in your library. In other words, as you are adjusting your collections to this new world that we are inhabiting, I want you to make sure to be talking in normal tones, and I'll suggest even excited tones. This is, of course, I would argue, the most exciting time for libraries and librarians since the late 19th century. And we are engaged, in effect, in reinventing many of our traditions. So I'm thinking you should go at this whole business with a tone, with a general tone of excitement, rather than one of defensiveness and whispering. And of course, as Sam has suggested, we don't want our clients to find us engaging in midnight dumpster runs and other forms of what they would regard as skullduggery with respect to our library assets. So talk in a normal tone of voice to as many people as you can. Second thing about my title, as I look at the subtitle, this word management has a kind of bland, bureaucratic flavor to it for a time that, and a set of initiatives that I think are really vivid and energizing. We are, in fact, pushing traditions of local housing and access of print materials to an extreme with regional and national general collections. We're moving from open stacks for all general collections to remote access for much, and in some of our cases, most of the material that we will make available to our users. We're moving from self-reliance to interinstitutional dependence, from local to consortial decisions, and from local jobs to consortial work. So I'd really like to find a more energized word than this somewhat bland, bureaucratic word, management. Management has never been a word that's gotten lots of people excited about what might happen next. I've often used the noun redevelopment, collection redevelopment, but I'd be glad if you could think of a better word to describe the series of changes that we're talking about these days with respect to print collections. I'd be glad to hear it. And I'll even send you a prize. I'm not quite sure what it'll be. Maybe some of the books that we will be discarding from my library. Okay, in terms of my presentation today, I'd like to kind of back up a level and talk about some assumptions and background to this whole question of what we are communicating about the direction the library community is taking with respect to print collections. Second, I'd like to discuss with you the substance of and strategies for communication. And third, a conclusion that urges you to get off your duff and take some action. I'd like to begin with some acknowledgements, particularly to groups that have helped me understand the issues of collaborative collections work. In the present case, chief among them, the Committee on Institutional Cooperation, which invited me about a year ago to give what turns out to be a version of this talk. And in my second line there, I cite some of my muses. Rick, Constance, Lizanne, and Roger are frequent, as well as Sam, are frequent discussants with me of these issues, and I owe to them a great deal of thanks for helping me see the issues that we're engaged in clearly. I'm going to talk today in very general terms. I may mention a few cases or projects, but I'm not going to go into gory details about any given situations. If you'd like, I'd be glad to discuss the Oxy case, the one I know best, in terms of our plans for collections and how we've managed things. That experience is with my local situation is subsumed in the following slides. But if you'd like to be more explicit, I'd be glad to be so if you want to raise a question. Okay, this is my active learning slide, I'm calling it. And in many ways, the questions that you see on this slide are the heart of the matter in terms of communication with those who think sharing collections is a bad idea, whether that sharing entails remote housing of locally owned collections or in fact divesting of local collections in favor of access through trusted partners. We all know, and I think Sam has suggested this, that books acquire being. They have a moral status. There is an ethic of respect for them. And I'd invite you the next time you look at a wastebasket and think of throwing one of your own books into it, what that moral status entails. It's hard for us to trash them or even part with them in favor of remote access. So as I go through my presentation, I would like you particularly to think about these questions because it is in fact these affective dimensions of books that really come to the fore when we begin talking with faculty and students both about the changes we're trying to make. As you all know, it's also, in some senses, the diction we use, the discourse we engage in that helps or hinders our argument or our communication. So I've been trying to find ways, and I must confess not very successfully, to find ways about what sounds like management speak to a lot of our users. As you all know, the worst insult that can be hurled against a campus unit is that they're taking a corporate approach. We've seen this here at Oxy. I know colleagues at the University of San Diego and at Harvard have also seen this when they've eliminated jobs in favor of creating other jobs or of downsizing their staff. Any decisions about that will automatically invoke charges of corporate or for-profit behaviors. So again, if any of you can think of ways of talking about the changes we're involved in without resorting to management speak or corporate euphemism, I'd be glad to hear it, and you would be making a major contribution to the discussion. So as I move through my presentation, if you have any thoughts about how to work with the affective dimensions and rhetorical dimensions of this, we'll all be grateful.
Okay, Bob, we do have one suggestion.
Okay, great.
It says, for the energy of alliteration, we would suggest campus community communicating about consortial collection cooperation.
Oh my goodness, all those C's. Yes, okay. That's very useful. Thank you. And I trust that suggestion is enshrined. I'll open up my question box here. Okay. Yes, a lot of C's. Okay. Like I said, I want to step back and just point out some obvious things. It never hurts to point out the obvious, as we all know. And my previous slides have suggested that communication takes place in a context, this affective context, the various dimensions of the changes that we're experiencing as a library community. This one and my next slide will try to fill in that context a bit. So I think we want to keep in mind that we will encounter, as we're discussing changes to print collections with our users, a range of views on these matters, both within groups and among groups. We all know that faculty in surveys tend to think of the library first and foremost as a set of materials, that is, as a collection. For our students, although they certainly care about the collections, they're concerned about how wide the wireless pipe is, how many couches we have for them to rest on during the day. They have a different set of concerns. So I think first and foremost, as we go into these projects of collaborative collections, we need to keep in mind that a library is many things and not the same thing to everybody. First and foremost, and most obviously, it's a group of materials, a collection. But it's also services and staff, it's spaces and tools, which are increasingly electronic. A library is a node in a network, as Sam has amply demonstrated with his slides about cooperative agreements. It's a cultural and educational institution. And finally, it's a social or common space, an expression of communal commitment to knowledge creation and dissemination and use of knowledge. So we remember that although a library does not make much sense without the first of these, a collection, all of these functions are valued and used by our various constituencies to different degrees. And all are in the process of being rebalanced as the forces we all know so well are impinging on libraries. So I want to remind you first and foremost that there's no success formula for all of this. There will be people who come to you and say, this is the devil's work you're engaged in, and I would just as soon things continue as they have been for my life as a scholar or student. You can certainly take certain steps in your communication and your other planning efforts to reduce that risk, but you can't reduce it completely. The faculty are a many-headed beast, as are the students. Not all faculty think alike about these matters, certainly, and I think as you communicate, as you make your plans with the campus, you will not want to assume that only those faculty voices that object to one or another element of your plan are the most important voices for you to listen to. We all know that the library is a local collection. Try to close a campus branch library, or in a public library setting, try to close a neighborhood branch. You will quickly find out how local people's sense of a library is. And finally, and in keeping with my first slide about not whispering, communication is not just coming up with things to tell people. Communication is a way of working with them. So by all means, bring those people into your planning, bring your campus constituents into your planning as soon as you can. Okay, why will all of this work on print collections, this collaborative work on print collections work. A few more assumptions for you. As we all know, there's a long time history of collections collaborations in library land. And in fact, the building blocks that we are using today to deepen that collaboration have been shaped for some decades. And I point out some of those these elements to you here in this slide. What is happening today in some senses is an intensification or amplification of a long evolution, but I think we could safely contend that these processes of intensification or amplification will result in a new order and a fundamentally different approach to print materials accesses. We also all know that libraries have cooperation in their DNA. Look back at the founding documents of our profession in the late 19th century, and you will see cooperation on various matters written all over them. But we also know that the librarians who practice in libraries, along with library users, are territorial, tribal, and hierarchical. Sam has suggested in his slides issues we need our various tribes and hierarchies to work through. But we all know we're at some level suspicious of each other. How many times have you heard in consortial meetings how long it takes, how that particular collections officer at College Y doesn't think very well about this, that interlibrary resource sharing person over at institution Z doesn't work fast enough, doesn't follow the rules, et cetera, et cetera. So I want to caution us to keep in mind this tension between our values and the way we perform our work. So here I've given you some things to think about in terms of why I think this will work, and some of these, of course, echo Sam's comments as well. In terms of our history and current developments, we are developing some new models for large-scale resource sharing, and there are many models out there. Sam has cited a few. The ongoing replacement of print with electronic publications, both from the publisher's point of view, journal and monograph publishers, and from the aggregator's point of view, all the libraries of electronic publications that we can now buy. There's an increasing acceptance of reading software and reading devices that I think will affect our constituents' sense of the importance of keeping print books on the shelf very strongly as more and more people assume that electronic text is what they're going to use, at least for the purposes of discovery and evaluation. I think the incentives are too great not to do this. Space use considerations and the costs of maintaining open shelf collections. The avoidance of the costs of solo housing of materials off-site. It costs us a lot to build warehouses and high-density storage. I think the advice to all of us should be to look for partnerships in which we can share those costs with other libraries. I think we will find that housing remotely suggests that we house lesser rather than greater numbers of copies, especially for 20th century works and for works that have been printed from electronic files. And I think we also need to work in terms of these cost incentives on joint acquisitions plans for new materials. Various consortia have found it easier to avoid acquiring many more print copies than it is to get rid of old things. So, and again, to echo Sam, faculty and their disciplines are not all alike, and we should work as we can with those fields that are most ready to accept electronic access and remote physical access to older materials. An important part of this whole business, too, is the information systems that afford discovery and delivery of the materials that we have jointly stored. and again, please interrupt me in mid-careen if you have questions or comments about what I'm showing you here. Okay, what are we communicating? As Sam has suggested, we have a lot of planning and good options for our users that we can communicate. But again, I want to revert to my initial comment about the problem of management speak. There will be those among our users who will see the words collection management and say this is just a euphemism or corporate doublespeak for getting rid of books. A good case study for those of you who want one is what's currently transpiring at the New York Public Library as they argue with some of their supporters that they can in fact safely remove up to a third of their print book collection, their low-use materials, to off-site housing in New Jersey and reuse that space for other public functions. A circulating library now housed at the Midtown Manhattan branch and their business library a little bit downtown, and that they could also safely install public use computers. But there are those among their users who think this is the worst idea in the world. So if you want a case study in how and what to communicate, the New York Public Library currently is an active one. Our colleague Constance Malpas published a couple of years ago her report about the cloud library research she did with New York Public, New York University, and Princeton about the prospects for joint serving of print materials. And I have heard a faculty member hurl this accusation at her report, which is very much couched in the terms of what you would think of as a consultant's report in the management community, in the business development community. You heard from Rick Lugg the other day about the case that he can make with numbers and related cost and both direct costs and opportunity costs for housing large amounts of print on campus and for avoiding doing that consortially. So if you look at Rick's blog and its related pages, you will see a very good summary of why this is important to do. Sam has reminded you of that as well in his slides.
Excuse me, Bob?
Yes.
You have a question?
Sure.
It says, should we not also be thinking about collective e-books? Our consortium has experienced positive results with consortial purchasing of e-books.
Right. Good point. Thank you very much. I think one of the things that consortia are doing as they think about how best to work with their users, with their various sensibilities about print materials, is offer them the alternative, that is e-books. Again, I think we're seeing increasing acceptance by our readers of certain functions that they can perform more easily with a library of electronic texts than they can with a library of print texts. And so I think consortia are well advised to work together, although publishers, I think, are making that more and more difficult, I understand, for consortia to come to terms with them about electronic libraries. Certainly the Orbis Cascade Alliance in the Pacific Northwest is important in this regard, as is OhioLink. I know the Connect New York college libraries are also working on this, as are other consortia around the country, whether they're systems like the University of California system or more loosely confederated, or I won't say loosely confederated because they're tightly confederated libraries, as in Ohio, but I'll call them multi-type. Yes, important point. Thank you. Because as we build access and discovery mechanisms for electronic texts, we are, of course, working generally to encourage the transition from print to electronic use of materials. And that transition will help us better make the argument about collective approaches to managing print text. I think this list here, I'm trying to give you an idea of why various consortia, and again, Sam has pointed this pointed you in these directions as well, how it's beneficial to our users to work on this proactively and consortially rather than chaotically or reactively. Some of the things we need to think about, however, is that this, in terms of being able to reinvest in space, that space is not fungible until we want to use it for something else. At that point, we can compare the costs of leaving the print books there to the costs of how we could of remodeling that space for other uses. And again, this is one of the big factors in the brouhaha at the New York Public Library at this point. So we can then measure the costs of keeping print there against the opportunity costs of not renovating that space to house other academic purposes. And I don't know of any of us around the country on any campus that says, oh, we can build new buildings to house certain functions at will. Most of us are in highly contentious real estate situations. Our campuses can't expand. There's no room for more buildings. So we have to use best, as well as we can, the real estate we currently have. We should also make the argument that as we move away from tending large amounts of print, we save, sorry, that was my phone ringing, we save staff costs to repurpose them for other services that we want to become engaged in. So there's some of the points that you might make as we move ahead with this, and why we should and what we should be communicating with our constituents. Sam, again, has provided a lot of ammunition in his slides of how this planning effort is important and what we're going to communicate. Okay? Excuse me, I was distracted by that phone ringing. Okay, so what are you going to talk with your users about after you've done the obvious? And I've tried to point out the obvious here again. The message in terms of your discussion or your agenda with your campus constituents will be a message about resource allocation, the multiple roles of the library and how those are adjusting to new circumstances, the multiple constituencies and their interests that you're trying to address, trends in publishing and the use of text, and how the library community is collectively gathering to provide a secure and desirable future for print. Certainly, you work on different kinds of campuses or in different library settings, and your institutional cultures and the structures you already have for planning processes and for communicating with your users will be different. What might work at a small college like mine in a city well stocked with large research libraries might be different from if you're a small college in Idaho, or if you don't have a strong consortial set of arrangements already. But insofar as I can generalize on this slide and the next about strategies or tactics for communication, here are the obvious ones. So certainly if you have a library committee that's useful for they should front this discussion with the campus. It shouldn't be the librarians with their hat in hand going to the campus to raise these issues. It should be the faculty and others on the library committee. And in fact, it might even be useful, even if you have a library committee, under their auspices or under the auspices, as we did here at OXI, of the Vice President for Academic Affairs, to constitute a separate task force to work with the set of questions around the future of print collections. I can't emphasize enough the importance of developing a plan with your campus community. Don't present it full-blown to them in all of its highly packaged and brilliant genius, and then ask them to approve of it. You want to build, as we do with other library services. Communicating with our campus is our way of building a community of interest around the many questions that we're dealing with. So develop your plan with them transparently and as something you work on together. Again, you want to avoid accusations of clandestine activities in the dark of night with the dumpster. We all know libraries that have run into trouble with students and faculty finding things in the morning and then brandishing the remains as they ask for lynching of librarians who have done this. We've seen, both in Sam's slides and in mine, there are all sorts of benefits to the campus community of working on these issues with partners. And we don't want to disadvantage our arguments about those benefits by appearing to move on our own and hastily. Now, you will argue that there are all sorts of structures in place on campus. Opening up a discussion to the campus is the surest way to kill progress and innovation. I would argue that if you're working well with your advisory groups, with a task force that you create, you can set a common agenda and get work done in a lot less time than academic decision-making is usually credited with taking. But make no sudden moves on your own initiative. Okay? Okay, and what do you do after you've done the obvious? As we pointed out, taking advantage of today's opportunities and addressing the challenges libraries face is not a local but a collective matter. Consortial work these days is the local work, and if you don't believe me, look at the report from ARL's Task Force on 21st Century Research Collections that was released a couple of weeks ago. You'll find that on their website. Nothing will happen unless you make it happen, so we all need to take leadership for this at the local and consortial level. So what do you do next? Your next moves, of course, will be, first of all, strengthening and multiplying your resource sharing and document delivery ties. And one of the things that I'm trying to do, and it hasn't been, I haven't seen a lot of uptake among our partners, is to increase the loan period for the books that you're borrowing from your primary borrowing partners. Everybody complains to me that I can get a long loan period for the books that are on the shelf, but I can't get a long loan period from our borrowing partners. So I think we need to increase the loan periods. If your collection is tired in certain areas, update it. That's certainly the case with us. As the comment a few minutes ago in the question bot suggested, buy more e-monographs and work with your people on the best way to use those in their research and teaching. Get a task force together if you don't have one already. Hold public meetings. Our task force on a project we call the Academic Commons had a couple of public meetings with the campus as part of the campus-wide strategic planning process in academic year 2010-11. You can help the discussion on campus by gathering data about your use, your circulation rates, by publication date, et cetera, the presence of your monographs in other collections, and you can create a pilot project. This is another suggestion that Sam made. A pilot project with a major section of your collection that you're thinking of housing remotely or of deaccessioning in favor of collective remote access. Digitize some important texts, older texts particularly, that are in your collection. work with the Hathi Trust and other forces in library land who are trying to settle the legal issues around outing the digitized orphans and making the legal arrangements that we will need in order to get access to the large corpora of digitized in-copyright materials that Hathi holds and that Google has also made available in terms of snippets. I think the sooner we can do that, the better off we're going to be in terms of helping our campus communities see their way to new methods, developing and adopting new methods for browsing and accessing text beyond the print. And then, as Sam suggested, if you can find homes for divested volumes, that's all to the good. We are thinking of working with the Internet Archive's Open Library Project. You know that they're digitizing things. They've developed a lending model for electronic texts, and they're also warehousing the print volumes. So that's one way of doing it. Okay, this is my get off your duff slide. I've indicated that I think that nothing's going to happen unless you make it happen. We need leadership at all levels of our organization, people who are willing to set a collective agenda and bring others along with that agenda. So here are my suggestions in conclusion. We are constantly exhorted, especially those of us who are liaison librarians, reference librarians, outreach librarians, et cetera, but I think this is true of all librarians as we reshape our profession around collective libraries rather than local libraries. Get out of your library, and here are some ways to do that. Get out of ALA, ACRL, ALCTS, and out to your disciplinary associations and other groups that are working at the regional and national level to address the whole series of issues that technology and changing communication patterns are affecting in publishing and all of the institutions of knowledge, including higher education. So it's important to me, particularly, that librarians get involved in scholarly associations like the AHA, the MLA, and work there with faculty to raise and discuss the large issues that are affecting our collective work in terms of teaching and learning and knowledge production. Science, the professional associations in the scientific community, chemistry, physics, etc., are especially active in developing pedagogical tools and ways of using information productively in the classroom. And I think we would do well to align ourselves with them. My second bullet here pretty much makes that same point. Get out into the national discussions about research, teaching, learning, and pedagogy, and come back, re-engineer the conversation back to discussions in your library about how to manage collections collectively. That's also true of library organizations, whether it's the Hathi Trust, the Coalition for Networked Information, or the many other venues in addition to the to ALA and ACRL and ALCTS, where these matters are being discussed. So try to influence the library groups that you belong to in terms of these issues. Activate your consortium or group. I'm sure we've all been to consortial meetings where the several parties sit around and nod their heads wisely at a presentation. Yes, yes, this should happen. Yes, yes, that's all a good idea. Well, raise your hand and say, I want to take charge of that, and who in the room is going to work with me on it? I recently had the privilege of joining some of your other presenters in this particular webinar because we're advisors to a large-scale multi-library type grant project in the state of Maine to build a collective print collection for public and academic libraries and the state library in Maine. And they have task forces and groups, and it's wonderful to see there the willingness of their people to step up and say they want to participate, not only participate in the discussion, but help drive the decisions and develop the plans that they're making. And finally, lobby your vendors. And this may come out of left field in a discussion of communication, but none of this is going to work unless, as Sam has suggested, there are not only the appropriate consortial policy and governance arrangements in place, but also the appropriate information sharing systems in place. So when you're talking to your vendor, ask them to develop their systems from the assumption that libraries are collectively building collections rather than individually building collections and then sharing them somehow through allied systems. And if any of you are thinking about OCLC's WorldShare systems, push them as hard as you can to develop that system so it really does what we need it to do. So I have come to the end of my presentation. I'd be glad to take additional questions. My email address was in the first slide. Please contact me. What can I do to emphasize or develop some of the points I've made? And if you want to hear Sam and me answer these things together, I'd be glad to bring Sam back in and take advantage of his knowledge on these issues.
Okay, I'm here.
Has anyone come up with, in addition to the multiple and alliterative C's, any other ways of talking with people about these deeply serious affective connections that people develop with printed books, especially bound books? Sam, have you encountered this in your work in the various consortia you're working with, and ways that they have tried to have this discussion?
Well, not too many. I mean, local discussions on campuses are the primary mechanism. Doing it at the consortial level, I don't know of any examples. It's hard to do because the affect plays out on the local campus.
Yeah. Well,
we don't actually engage faculty in our consortial discussions very often.
Yeah. Well, do you have any advice for people based on your knowledge of campus discussions? I know I'm kind of putting you on the spot.
Right. Well, I think that working closely with library committees, with faculty affairs committees, any campus governance groups that you can identify, and actually taking them into the stacks and walking around and looking at the books and going to their disciplinary areas with them it can be a powerful way of bringing a greater level of nuance to the discussion.
Well,
I've done that on a few occasions where you get out, from the table. You're all sitting around the table talking in the abstract, and instead you go out and you talk in and among the books.
Yeah.
And it can be a valuable exercise.
Yeah. In case the participants in the webinar are interested, we're going to reduce the size of our monograph collection here at OXE probably 30 or 40% over the next few years. And one of the things that we're going to do this summer is in LC classes Q through V, the sciences broadly construed, we're going to place in each book that's a candidate for deaccessioning a slip. We have 3 colors of slips. White ones for the roughly 16,000 We're talking about roughly 40,000 plus, 40 to 45,000 monographic volumes there. And what we're going to do is put white slips in the roughly 15 or 16,000 that meet, among other criteria, no official circulation or in-house use in the roughly 20 years that we've had a circulation system. Another colored slip in books that have circulated once, and another colored slip in books that have circulated twice. And of those roughly 40,000 books, some 60% of them, almost 2/3, will have slips in them. And I will be inviting scientists and those humanists who are interested in the history of science to come with me to the stacks. I'm not sure whether I'll give them kind of mid-afternoon treats or we'll have a happy hour down there at the end of the day. But I'm going to invite them down, just as Sam has suggested, to look at the evidence and see what they say.
I would just like to interject that I'm always on the lookout for libraries which have developed or are in the process of developing written collection management plans. And so if you have done one or if you are working on one, please feel free to contact me. I'm trying to assemble examples which I will at some point figure out a way to make available to people as exemplars, because I think we desperately need to articulate what it is we're doing locally and how it feeds into a larger national picture.
Okay, we have a comment on what you've just said. Someone has said that we found slips to be problematic when reviewing reference titles in our reference room and stacks. And then I also have a question.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. I see the commenter's name is Mary Woodley. I'm sure you could. I guess we'd need greater detail as to precisely what the problematic aspect of that was. But yeah, I'm sure Mary could advise us. Yeah, and you have a question too?
Yes, we had a question that came a couple minutes ago. It says, Bob, what do you think of the terminology transforming collections that ALCTS used as a task force in conjunction with ALA's transforming libraries?
Thank you. Full disclosure here. There's a session sponsored by that group, that Transforming Collections Task Force, on Sunday morning from 8 to 10 at ALA, and I'm one of the panelists. So I have to be a little careful what I say. I think the okay, let's go at it this way. There will be some of our users who, no matter what we call this new world that we're entering, who won't be happy. I mean, one of the things about communication on these matters is you're not going to please all the people all the time. And whether we call it collection redevelopment, transforming collections, if they don't buy the kinds of planning processes that and policy dimensions that Sam has articulated, and they don't buy the advantages of this, they're not going to buy anything. So you could abracadabra the rhetoric all you want, and they're still not going to like it. So I think transforming collections is a good way of talking about it, as long as we understand that that transformation involves a lot more than just the things themselves. It's a bigger idea than, oh yes, we'll now rely on digitized public domain monographs instead of printed public domain monographs. It means more than, yes, we will digitize our manuscript collections and make them more accessible that way. So it means a lot more than the things themselves. It means our whole portfolio of library services. It means the jobs we have in our libraries. It means the relationships we have with other libraries. It means the way we think about our profession. So, and I'm going to try to talk a little bit about some of that stuff in my presentation. And I'm sorry, but it was just too good an opening not to give a plug for that session.
We also have a comment here. It says one of our librarians uses the term right-sizing rather than downsizing the collections.
Yeah, I like that. Certainly, the diction of downsizing raises for a lot of people all of the horrors of corporate takeovers and all of that. I think right-sizing is another way, but if we don't, I think we have to be careful whatever we call it. And again, Sam has done a good job of outlining all of the elements of the planning process, or the dimensions of what the plan has to include. We have to talk about the collective and why it's right for the collective of libraries to be doing this. So it's hard because people's sense of the collection of a library is local. You know, my stuff on my shelf, or what can be brought to me from other places. So if we can get our faculty and students and administrators to think about the rightness of the overall collaborative picture and why that's a better future for print, we're better off with any language we can come up with. Sam, were you trying to say something?
Well, I just wanted to say I think right-sizing is a nice way to frame it. And a good way, an entry point, I think, to the conversation is to start with interlibrary loan and digital access and ascertain the degree to which people are comfortable with those services. And they tend to be pretty high. Then you move into shared print archiving as a way of ensuring that, and sometimes a consortium can make this claim, other times they can't. It's useful if you can make the claim that you will still have access to print copies of every book which is currently in this collection. Nothing is going to disappear, but it won't necessarily be housed here. It will be deliverable either, you know, digital on demand or in print form. And so you kind of lead people through the thought process, which helps to overcome that affective reaction that you spoke about, Bob.
Yeah, I think, that's a great way of understanding this, that although print is first and foremost in people's mind, I think, when they think about the library, and there's certainly segments of our user base, students as well as faculty, whom I heard from a year ago when we had our open meeting, they just can't stand the thought that things will be delivered. They want them in our stacks. Those people you may not persuade, but I think the vast majority of faculty and students on the campus will understand this as a way, you know, you're working on print as part of a whole set, a matrix, if you will, of changes that are happening in publishing, knowledge distribution, use of scholarly materials, et cetera, et cetera. So framing it, as Sam has just said, in this whole context is extremely important. It's
right,
not
one
just,
more thing.
I'm taking away your books.
Right. In fact, I think the layer of it that really gets people excited is that we're going to join this shared print archive or HATI Trust, and in fact, you'll have access to X million volumes. Far broader scope than you do today. We'll be able to load the records in our catalog. Discovery and delivery will be far more efficient. And so they really begin to see the benefits then of this sharing of the resources. Period.
All right, thank you. We're just about out of time. I wanted to mention about the problematic slips. It's because they were falling out of the books, and they're going to use labels to attach to the spines. Okay.
Well, okay, I'll be interested to see what happens to ours, because these books, for the most part, have not circulated in recorded memory. So I'd be glad to have some of those slips falling out if people actually take them off the shelf.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you, Sam and Bob, for your insightful tips on planning and communication as it concerns shared collections. Thank you also to all of our attendees. We hope you found today's session useful. You'll soon receive a short online evaluation form. Please take a few minutes to respond to the questions and return the form to us. Your comments are very valuable and help ALCTS to plan new continuing education offerings. I'd like to thank Mary Miller, the organizer for this online pre-conference, as well as Carrie Cassio and Alyssa Novak for providing technical support for today's webinar. The support they provide make it possible for us to present these webinars smoothly. Information about all ALCTS webinars and continuing education events can be found on the ALCTS homepage at ala.org/ALCTS. Another ALCTS pre-conference will be taking place June 12th through the 14th called The How and Why of Research, What is the Rock in Your Shoe? Thank you again for joining us this afternoon, and we hope you will participate in other ALCTS events in the future.